probably seen them, right? Those pictures online, these huge, grand buildings with windows just buried halfway underground. It's the big mystery behind the whole mud flood theory, this idea of a lost global empire that was just wiped out and covered up. But what if the flood wasn't mud? What if it was a flood of bad information? In this explainer, we're going to decode the mud flood. And what we find? Well, it might just rewrite the entire program of history as you know it.
So let's start with the big question this whole theory is asking. What if the history that we're all taught in school isn't some fixed, unchangeable timeline of events? What if it's more like a program? Something that could be edited, overwritten, maybe even hacked to serve some other purpose we don't know about.
Okay, so the first piece of evidence is what you can see with your own eyes. Proponents of the theory will point to buildings exactly like this one, with doors and windows that seem to just sink below the modern street. Now, to them, this isn't just some weird architectural choice. No, it's an anomaly. It's a glitch in the official story, proof of a massive system crash that points to some forgotten catastrophe. And it's one of those things, once you start looking for it, you see it everywhere. These incredible old buildings with their first floors apparently swallowed by the ground. Now, the official narrative has its explanation, sure, but the sheer number of these buildings all over the world makes you stop and ask, what are we not being told? What truth has been literally buried? Right, before we can get to the real source code of this mystery, we've got to run a diagnostic on the physical evidence. Let's debug these so-called sunken buildings and see if the story holds up to a real architectural analysis. So here we've got two completely conflicting lines of code. On one side, you have the mythos. Some sudden, chaotic event buried all these structures. But on the other side, you've got architectural logic, which says, hey, these lower levels were part of the original design. They were a feature, not a bug. And this slide just lays it out perfectly. You have to remember, 19th century architecture was all about class. That lower level, the Souterrain, that was for the staff, for storage. It was built with rougher stone on purpose. The grand main floor, the Beletage, that was for the owners. Think about it. If a real flood buried an ornate building, you'd see all those fancy details disappearing into the dirt. Not this clean, deliberate separation. It was designed hierarchy. And on top of that, we have actual, well-documented cases of entire cities. We're talking Chicago, Seattle, that intentionally raised their street levels back in the 19th century. This was a massive engineering project to put in modern sewers and stop floods. So the buried floors aren't evidence of some secret disaster. They're evidence of incredible civic progress. So this is the really crucial point. If the architectural evidence for a physical mud flood just doesn't hold up, why is the theory so powerful? Why do so many people connect with it? The source material suggests it's because that feeling of a break in our history is very, very real. The mud flood myth becomes this kind of intuitive answer to some very real oddities in our official timeline.
And that brings us to the real core of this theory. The real mud that's covering our past isn't dirt and silt. It's time itself, an artificial forgery planted right in our historical source code.
So the theory goes that the mud is really just a metaphor for a totally fabricated block of time, specifically the Middle Ages. The idea is that an entire era was just inserted into the historical record to hide something, to create a huge gap between the ancient world and our own. Now, look, if you're going to claim that history was hacked, you need to show the evidence, right? You need to find the traces in the code. So the next few slides are all about the data points that theorists claim are proof of this manipulation, and they all point to this really weird, repeating 800-year pattern. Okay, now this is really interesting. The data shows two massive historical figures, Charlemagne and Charles V, both born in a year 1500. Now, for Charles V, that's 1500 AD, like we know it. But for Charlemagne, it's the year 1500 ab urbe condita, which means after the founding of Rome. Theorists argue that's no coincidence. It's a suspicious echo, almost like a clerical copy and paste error when history was being written down. And the pattern seems to continue with major wars. You've got three huge pivotal conflicts, all fought in the same general area of Germany, and each one is separated by about 800 years. So, are these just strange echoes of history? Or are they duplicates? Are they glitches in the historical code that point to a timeline that's been tampered with? The next piece of evidence isn't about what's in the historical records. It's about what's missing. An anomaly connected to one of the biggest killers in human history, the plague. 0. That's the number. The number of recorded plague outbreaks during the 800 years that supposedly separate two of history's worst pandemics. You have the plague of Justinian, and then 800 years later, boom, the Black Death. And genetic analysis has confirmed it was the exact same pathogen. So where did it go for 8 centuries? The theory's conclusion is pretty chilling. Maybe those 800 plague-free years never actually happened at all. Okay, so if the Middle Ages were just an inserted phantom time, what history did they cover up? This is where we get back to that mysterious empire of Tartaria. Let's try to recontextualize it inside this new framework of history hacking. So according to this analysis, Tartaria isn't some physical empire that sank into the mud. It's a symbol. It's a placeholder name for the authentic history, a direct line from the ancient world to the early modern period that was supposedly erased and replaced by the fabricated story of the Middle Ages.
So, what have we actually uncovered by debugging this whole theory? We've gone from looking at sunken buildings to a potential forgery at the very heart of our timeline. Let's try to decrypt the final message here.
And really, this is the core takeaway. This quote from the source material just reframes the entire mystery perfectly. The cataclysm wasn't geological, it was clerical. A manipulation of documents, of chronicles, of calendars. A flood of ink and paper that completely reshaped how we see our own past. But why? Why would anyone go through all the trouble of such a massive deception? Well, the theory suggests a very clear motive: to create a fake historical precedent, to literally invent centuries of history, to legitimize the power and the lineage of institutions like the Holy Roman Empire, giving them this deep, ancient foundation that they never actually had. Which leaves us with one final and pretty unsettling question. If our history really is a program, one that can be edited and rewritten to serve the powerful, who wrote the original code? And maybe more importantly, who's holding the keyboard today?